The battlefield was silent now. Smoke floated in the air like ghosts of fallen warriors' bodies. Of machines and soldiers lay across the cold steel ground of planet Arkanazon. The middle stood one man, tall, strong, silent, a human. His armor was scratched and burned, but he stood straight like a tower in the storm. His name was Captain James of Earth's Defense Force. He had done what no one else could do. He had won the war, not just for Earth but for the Galactic Alliance. He had led troops into impossible battles. He had made peace where others wanted blood. And today he was called to the Grand Palace of the High Council of Alvorianch, oldest rulers of the galaxy. The sky above the palace was filled with ships shining like stars in the daylight. Aliens from many worlds had come to watch the reward ceremony. It was not just a celebration, it was history inside the Golden Hall. The air was heavy with strange perfumes and the sound of soft alien music. Thousands watched from silver seats that floated in the air. At the center stood the High Speaker, an alien with skin like crystal and eyes like dark oceans. He raised his 6 arms and spoke in a deep voice. Today, we honor the human who brought peace to our worlds. Today we give him our highest reward. Captain James walked to the center. He did not smile. He did not bow. He only watched. The High Speaker pointed to the guards. Bring the reward. From the shadows came 2 soldiers in black robes. Between them was a girl, thin, quiet, chained. Her skin was pale blue, like the sky before rain. Her eyes were down. She did not speak. She did not fight. She was maybe 19 years old. She was a slave gift, a living reward for the human champion. The crowd clapped softly. Some looked at James with respect, others with curiosity, some with fear. James looked at the girl. She did not meet his eyes. She stood still like a statue of sadness. The High Speaker said, "She is yours now. Use her as you please. A hero deserves comfort." James said nothing. He stepped forward. The girl flinched. He reached for her chains and opened them. The chains fell to the ground like broken silence. Gasps filled the hall. The High Speaker's smile faded. James looked at the crowd. He spoke in a calm voice. "She is not a reward. She is not a gift. She is a person. I will not use Harry, will not own Harry, only fought to protect the free. I will not be part of slavery. Not now, not ever." Silence, long heavy silence. The guards looked confused. The council looked angry. The girl looked shocked. She slowly looked up at James, tears in her wide eyes. She whispered, "Why?" James said, "Because no one should live in chains. Because you are not property. Because I am human and humans protect the weak." The High Speaker stepped down, his crystal skin glowing red. He said, "You insult our traditions. You spit on our gift." James answered, "Then your gift is broken, and your tradition is wrong. I will not take her, but I will protect her from you, from all of this. She is free now, and she will stay free." One council member shouted, "If one slave is freed, all will want freedom." Another said, "This human will bring rebellion." James turned to the girl. "What is your name?" she said softly. "Lyra." James said, "Then Lyra, come with me. You owe me nothing, but if you want to walk free, you can walk with." Mesh nodded slowly like someone learning how to hope. The 2 of them walked out of the hall past guards who did not move, past crowds that only watched outside. The sky was still filled with ships, but now it felt heavier, like a storm was coming. Somewhere far above in orbit, a silent message was sent from the palace. It said, "The human has refused the gift. He has freed the girl. Plan Zeta must begin. Erase them if needed. No witnesses inside a small ship." James looked at Lyra. She sat in a corner, arms around her knees. He offered her food. She took it slowly. He said, "I do not know what they did to you, but I promise they will not do it again, not while I breathe." She whispered, "You are different." He said, "Maybe, or maybe this galaxy is just wrong." She looked at the stars through the window. He looked too. Neither of them spoke, but something had changed. A chain had been broken. A rule had been challenged. A war had just begun. But no one knew it yet, not even them. Small ship flew through space like a quiet bird lost between stars. Inside the ship everything was still cold silver. Walls hummed softly, and only 2 people were there. One was the man who broke rules. One was the girl who no longer wore chains. Captain James sat in the pilot seat, watching stars move like glowing dust. His eyes sharp but tired, his hands calm but ready behind Him sat Lyra, the girl given as a reward, but taken as nothing. She sat curled up near the wall, a blanket over her shoulders. Eyes moved across the room, not in fear this time, but in confusion. No chains, no orders, no pain, just quiet, just space. She had lived her life in silence and commands. Now there were none. She did not understand this freedom. James looked back and said, "You can sit here if you want." Lyra stood slowly, unsure, then stepped forward and sat in the co-pilot chair. She looked at the controls. Blinking and glowing, James smiled gently and said, "One of these buttons makes tea, but I can never remember which one." Lyra almost laughed, but stopped herself. She asked softly, "Why did you really free me?" James answered without turning, "Because I was given a gift that was never theirs to give. Because I saw fear in your eyes, and it reminded me of my sister. Because I do not believe peace comes from chains. Because I could not sleep if I left you behind." Lyra looked at him carefully. He did not lie. She had seen so many eyes full of control and coldness. His were not the same. Her hand touched the window, and she whispered, "Is this what stars look like when you are not in a cage?" James nodded and said, "Yes, and they get brighter the more free you are." Suddenly, the ship beeped. A message blinked on the screen. Encrypted urgent. James pressed it open and read the lines quickly. Then again his jaw tightened. Lyra saw the change. She asked, "What is?" I've replied, "They have marked me as a traitor. They are watching all routes. They want you back." Lyra froze. Her hands began to shake. She said, "I will go if it saves you." James looked at her and said firmly, "Never say that again. You are not a price to pay for safety. We run together, or we fight together. But you are not going back to slavery, not ever." Her voice trembled as she said, "You do not even know who I am." James said, "Maybe not, but I know who you are not. You are not a thing. You are not a reward. You are not theirs." Lyra breathed slowly, and for the first time the air did not feel like a prison. Ship changed course, flying toward an old station abandoned in orbit. James landed carefully and powered down. They stepped inside the dark, silent place, once full of life, now full of dust. Old machines clicked awake as lights blinked to life. James searched the room for supplies while Lyra explored a quiet corner. She found a mirror. She stared at her reflection, long and hard. The face staring back did not look like a slave anymore. James returned with a small bag of food and said, "This place is off-grid. They won't track us here for now." Lyra nodded and said, "You should know something." James sat and listened. She continued, "They did not give me to you by accident. I was not just a reward. I was part of something bigger. My people were taken long ago. Not all of us survived. Some said I was special. My blood holds something rare, something ancient." James listened without blinking. Lyra went on, "They believe I can unlock something lost, a weapon, a system I do not understand. I think they gave me to you, hoping you would trigger it, but you did not use me. Freed me. Now they are afraid." James leaned back and said, "So you are not just a prisoner, you are a key." Lyra said, "Yes. I do not know what I opened." James stood and looked at the stars through a broken window. He said, "Then we better find out before they do, because now it is not just about you, it is about all the others still in chains. If your blood can change things, then maybe freedom starts with you." Lyra walked beside him and asked, "Are you scared?" James said, "Every second, but I would rather be scared and right than safe and silent outside." The stars moved slowly, unaware of what had begun inside a station forgotten by time. Two people stood against a galaxy built on power and pain. One born into chains, one born into choice. Together they now carried a spark, and sparks can burn empires. The silence was deep, but not empty. It carried hope, and in that moment, Lyra spoke words no one ever taught her, words that tasted like freedom. She said, "Thank you." James replied, "We are not done yet. The stars wait, and so do the stories we will write, without chains, without fear, just us and the truth." The sky above planet Therion burned with the color of copper, and fire wind raced through steel towers where voices once cheered for war heroes. Now those same voices whispered new names, names like Captain James, names like Lyra, the girl who walked free, the girl who should not have existed outside chains, in hidden corners and shadowed halls. The story spread like wildfire. A human refused the reward. A human unchained a slave. A human walked away from power and said no. Whispers became talk. Talk became movement. In one mining sector, a slave dropped his tool and looked up at the guards without fear. In another farm colony, a mother told her child that maybe they would not grow up in chains. In a prison factory, an old man cried without knowing why, because something had shifted and he could feel it in his bones. The system was not cracking, it was breaking, and at the center of the storm, James and Lyra moved through forgotten space. Their ship now carried more than 2 people. It carried purpose. Inside the ship, Lyra studied old star maps and strange symbols from her childhood. James watched her and thought of everything he did not understand. But he knew this: freedom was louder than silence, truth was sharper than lies, and Lyra was more than a girl freed from chains. She was becoming a voice, a signal, and signals could not be stopped once heard. A message blinked across the control screen from a rebel cell hidden in the ruins of Sector Coro. They had seen the footage. They had heard the words. They wanted to meet. James said it was risky. Lyra said it was time, so they changed course and flew into darkness. The rebel base was deep under frozen stone and silent fields. They landed near a broken tower and were led inside by masked figures. The leader was a woman named Sarah. Once a commander, now an outcast. She had only one eye and a voice like thunder under snow. She looked at Lyra and said, "You do not look like a symbol." Lyra said, "I never asked to." Bessara replied, "That is how symbols are born, when someone who should not stand does when someone who should be silent speaks." James asked what they wanted. Sarah said, "Hope and weapons and truth, because the High Council is afraid, and afraid leaders make dangerous choices. They will erase you if they can. They will silence you and burn the echoes. They already ordered your capture and placed a price on your head higher than any warlord." James did not blink. Lyra said then, "Let them come, we are not afraid." But inside her heart moved fast, not with fear, but something deeper, a knowing that this would not stop unless something big changed, unless something powerful fell. Sarah showed them images taken by rebel spy ships, moving toward quiet colonies, troops gathering near slave sectors. The system was tightening its grip, afraid of what might slip through the cracks. James said, "We need proof, not just stories, real proof of what they are hiding." Zara nodded and said, "There is one place, the archive core on planet Vorna, vault of memory, buried under codes and steel. If you can get in, you can show the truth, you can burn the lies." James looked at Lyra. Lyra said, "Let us do it." The next day they left in silence, carrying codes given by Sarah, carrying hope given by whispers. They flew through old space routes filled with debris and ghosts of wars long buried. James asked Lyra what she felt. She said, "I feel like the stars are watching. I feel like my blood is waking up, and I do not know what it means, but I am not afraid anymore." When they reached Vorn, the planet was dark and cold and broken. Once a capital, now a grave. They landed in silence and walked through stone halls lit by flickering lights. Machines watched but said nothing until they reached the gate, the archive core. James entered the code. Nothing happened. Then Lyra stepped forward. She touched the panel, and the door opened, not with force, but with recognition, as if the machine knew her, as if the stars knew her. Inside were walls of light and sound, memories stored like frozen time. They searched. They found files sealed by the High Council, documents of slave trades, of stolen children, of experiments done in secret. They found a plan called Silence Protocol, a plan to erase any voice that questioned the order. James copied the files. Lyra stood still. Her hands touched a symbol on the wall, and suddenly her eyes glowed. Faint, bluey message whispered into the room in a voice ancient and soft. "Welcome. Lost air system linked." James pulled her back. Her body shook. Then, "Stop," she said. "Something just woke up and it knows my name." They ran back to the ship behind them, the archive core dimmed as if hiding again. As they flew up, Lyra turned to James and said, "They built this world on control, but we just found the cracks, and the cracks are growing." James looked ahead and said, "Then let us break it all. Let us end what should never have begun." Ship flew into stars, now watching with open eyes, and in every corner of every broken place, Someone felt the change, felt the shift, felt the fire. System was breaking, and the human and the girl had only just begun. The stars above whispered like old voices forgotten in time. James watched them from the cockpit, his hands steady, but his heart full of fire. Beside him Lyra sat in silence, her eyes not blinking, her breath slow and strange. Archive core had awakened something deep, something buried in her blood. She felt it like a second heartbeat, like a song she had never learned, but always known. They had taken the stolen files, they had copied the truths hidden for years. They now held proof of everything the High Council feared, proof of the slave experiments, the breeding programs, the silent assassinations, that the galaxy ran not on order, but on secrets and lies. But even with truth in hand, they knew they were being hunted. James flew the ship through old wormholes, marked as dead zones, his mind sharp with plans, and exits, his body tense like a soldier in a storm. Lyra sat behind him, still quiet, still glowing. Her fingers moved over symbols now familiar, though she had never seen them before. The ship responded to her like a loyal friend, like it knew her blood better than she did. James asked if she felt all right. Lyra said she did not know how to feel. She said something was moving inside her, not alive, not dead, something old. James told her they would figure it out together. She smiled, but it was a broken smile, the kind that hides more than it shows. In the distance, a signal blinked across the void. Old colony and neutral station, long forgotten, now sending a call. They followed it into the cold mist of asteroid fields and empty beacons. They landed near the ruins where once voices filled markets and ships danced in sky. Now only wind and dust remained inside. They found a survivor, a young boy with metal arms and frightened eyes. He told them the signal was a trap, he told. Then they were not the first to come. Then he pointed to the sky. 3 ships approached from the dark, each carrying hunters, elite killers from the High Council, sent not to capture but to erase. James pulled Lyra into cover, told the boy to run, told his own fear to wait. Gunfire echoed through broken stone walls, light clashing against shadow. James fought with calm precision. A man trained by war, shaped by loss, driven by choice. Lyra stayed behind a wall, her body shaking, her hands burning with strange heat. She could hear something calling her from deep within, a whisper, not in words but in feeling. One hunter reached her corner, raised a weapon, cold and cruel. Lyra raised her hand without thinking, and light exploded from her palm. The hunter flew back across the floor, unconscious, breathless, broken. James saw the blast and froze, not in fear but in awe. He shouted her name and ran to her side, stood there glowing from within like a star, remembering its birth. James asked what she had done. Lyra said she did not know, but it felt like it had always been there, waiting. James took her hand, and they ran through the ruins back to the ship. Boy followed behind, carrying a small bag of tools and courage. They launched into the stars with fire behind them and questions ahead. Inside the ship, Lyra looked at her hands and said, "They were right to fear me." James replied, "No, they were wrong to try to control you. Power is not evil, only those who abuse it are." She looked at him with wide eyes full of storm and wonder. She said, "What if I am more than just a girl? What if I was made to destroy, not to free?" James answered with calm fire in his voice, "Then we choose what you become. You are not their weapon, you are your own voice, and voices can shape worlds." Ship flew toward a safe zone, a rebel hideout hidden in the rings of a dead planet. Sarah greeted them with surprise and worry, her one eye scanning Lyra with new fear. They showed her the files, the truths, the blasts, the glowing blood. Sarah took a step back and said, "She is not just a symbol, she is a storm in skin." Lyra asked, "Do you fear me too?" Sarah replied, "No, but I fear what others will do to stop you. You are not the fire, you are the spark, and the fire is coming." Lyra sat alone that night, watching stars spin like thoughts she could not hold. James came and sat beside her without a word. She leaned on his shoulder and whispered, "I do not know what I am," he said. "You are the reason I believe this galaxy can change, and maybe that is enough." She looked at him and saw not just a soldier, not just a protector. She saw someone who chose her not as a weapon, not as a prize, as a person, as a partner, as a light in the dark. The stars above watched without judgment. The ship hummed a lullaby in the quiet, and inside, the girl with glowing blood and the man with burning purpose sat together, not as enemies of the system, but as builders of something new, something wild. The silence of space wrapped around the ship like a sleeping beast, calm on the outside, restless underneath. James stood at the window, staring into the endless black, his hands behind his back, his thoughts louder than any engine. Lyra sat in the center of the ship, eyes closed, breath even light still pulsing under her skin, like a hidden fire waking up after a long sleep. Files from the archive core were hidden deep inside the ship's system, locked behind codes only she could open. But they had more than just files now. They had something older, something stranger. They had the ship, not the small one they flew now, but the one they had found in the far reaches of a forgotten zone, marked as dead. Space on every map. It was not broken. It was not empty. It was waiting. They had landed near it after chasing a signal not sent by people, but by memory, by blood, by something that had waited for Lyra across time. The ship was unlike any James had seen, smooth and silent, shaped like nothing from this galaxy. It had no doors, only light, no engines, only hums. And when Lyra stepped close, it opened not with noise but with welcome. She had walked inside without fear, her feet light, her body warm, her eyes wide. The walls had glowed with her steps. The air had spoken without sound. The ship had whispered in her mind. It said, "Welcome, daughter of the core." It said, "We are awake again." James had followed, but the ship only lit up around her, only moved for her, only breathed when she touched it. Had seen many things in war, in peace, in shadows, but never this. Lyra sat now in the heart of the ship, surrounded by symbols she had never learned yet, somehow understood. Her hands moved slowly over them, like reading a story written inside her soul. James watched from behind, standing close enough to protect, far enough to not disturb. The ship began to shift, light crawling over its surface, sounds rising from deep below, lifted from the ground without a spark, without a tremble. And then it spoke, not in words, not in code, but in feeling. "We go now," it said. "We begin." Lyra opened her eyes and said, "It knows where the others are." James asked who the others were. Lyra said, "Others like me, others taken long ago, others with the same mark, same blood, same power, buried and forgotten." The ship showed them maps, not just of planets, but of hidden labs, secret prisons, places erased from records. Felt anger rise cold and sharp, but Lyra placed a hand on his and said, "We will find them, we will bring them home." The ship flew faster than anything he had ever piloted, cutting through space, like it remembered every path, every danger, every door that once closed now opened. They reached the first location, a station floating near a dying sun, cloaked and guarded by machines older than any Alliance tech. The ship cloaked itself without command, moved close and quiet, and opened a path. Inside they found cells made of light bodies, asleep in glass minds, frozen in dreams. Lyra placed her hand on one of the pods and it opened. With a sigh, a girl younger than her blinked awake, her eyes glowing, her breath slow. Lyra smiled and said, "You are not alone anymore." One by one they opened each pod, each heart, each forgotten life. By the time they left, the ship was full of silence, not heavy, not sad, but waiting. James looked around at the faces, the eyes, the stories still forming. He said, "This is bigger than we thought." Lyra said, "This is what they feared." The next stop was worse, a hidden bunker under the ice of a moon that screamed. In the wind inside were bones and chains, and one boy still breathing. He had scars over his body and fear in his voice, but when he saw Lyra, he said, "I dreamed of you." James lifted him from the floor, carried him to the ship, placed him beside the others. Ship did not question, it simply grew open, changed as needed. It was alive in a way machines should not be yet. It followed Lyra like a lost child finding home. Sarah sent them a message asking where they had gone, saying the council was hunting faster, now saying they had placed a bounty, not just on James and Lyra, but on all who helped them. James replied with one sentence, "We are not hiding, we are building." The ship flew through nebulous storms, asteroid seas, in silence. With every life they saved, with every truth they uncovered, the galaxy shifted. The people began to speak louder, the guards began to hesitate, the slaves began to dream. One Night as the others slept, James sat alone watching Lyra speak softly to the ship, teaching it names, faces, songs. Asked her what she thought it all meant. She looked at him and said, I was never meant to be one thing. A gift, not a weapon, not a queen. But maybe I was meant to wake something greater, not just in the stars, but in people. Maybe the real power is not mine. Maybe it is the power to make others believe they are more than what the system told them. James smiled without words and nodded. Stars outside pulsed slowly as if listening. The ship carried not just passengers but purpose. And as Lyra stood among the others, glowing quiet, strong, the galaxy began to wake with her. Stars no longer felt silent. They pulsed like drums, calling every corner of the galaxy to listen inside. The ancient living ship, now named Solara, a new kind of crew gathered. Not soldiers, not rebels, not slaves, but survivors awakened and remembering. James stood near the center deck where glowing maps changed shape with Lyra's breath, her power flowing like light across every wall. The children and teens, once locked away, once silent, now walked freely through the ship, some still afraid, some slowly smiling, some touching metal like it was magic. Sarah's voice came through the main channel, her tone sharp, her words faster than before. She said the High Council had moved warships towards sectors known for rebel support. She said they had started calling Lyra a threat to galactic unity, a false heir, a danger to peace. She said they had placed a kill order on her name. James listened without blinking, his jaw tight, his hands calm. Lyra stood behind him, her eyes low, not in fear, but in thought. She said they were afraid of truth, afraid of what might happen if people stopped obeying, stopped fearing, stopped kneeling. She said they were afraid of memory and the power it gave to those who had been silent. Said Solara showed them live feeds from border colonies, guards moving people into camps, soldiers scanning faces, drones flying low over homes. James turned to Lyra and said it was time, no more hiding. They had to stand. They had to show the galaxy that the system could break, and still the stars would shine. The next step was not rescue, it was resistance. They flew to a rebel stronghold, buried inside the rings of a gas planet, its surface glowing with storms, its tunnels carved by time and fire. Sarah met them in person, this time her face older, her eye harder, but her words full of steel and storm. She looked at Lyra, then at the others stepping off. Solara, children with strange eyes and quiet power. She said they were not just passengers, they were proof that the system had lied, that power had been stolen, that the Council's peace was built on broken backs and erased names. Lyra spoke in the center of the hall, to rebels, to traitors, to spies, to free minds. Still unsure, she spoke not like a queen, not like a weapon, but like a flame in the dark. She said we were never weak, we were only hidden, we were never gone. We were only buried. Now we rise, now we speak, now we fight. The hall shook with voices shouting her name. Not as a leader, not as a savior, but as one of their own. The plan formed quickly. Strike key sectors, broadcast the files from the archive, show the hidden prisons, send truth like fire across every network. Solara would lead the charge, its systems too fast, its memory too deep for the Council to trace. James would command the operations from within. Lyra would speak across every channel, her voice carried by signal and star. First strike came at dawn on a moon covered in white dust and silver. Towers, Council troops were holding families hostage, burning rebel books, erasing names from records. Solara came from the clouds, light slicing the sky like a blade. Doors opened without sound. Children stepped out, not with weapons, but with open hands. Glowing with memory, the soldiers froze, unsure. Their training never told them what to do. When the ghosts of the forgotten stood in front of them, James moved in behind the distraction, disabling their weapons, locking down systems, leading people to safety. Lyra stood in the middle of the square, her voice broadcasted across the colony. She said, "We are the voices you tried to bury. We are the names you tried to forget, and we are not afraid of you anymore." In other sectors, rebel cells rose faster than expected. More joined the cause, more ships followed Solara, more banners were painted with her name. But the Council did not retreat. They launched their own plan, a direct strike at Solara, using a commander once close to James, once trusted, once human. Arrived with silence, no warning, no signal. just a sudden blast across Solara's shields. A message sent directly to James. It said, "I am sorry, brother, but I must follow the order." James stared at the message for a long time, then looked at Lyra and said they would not stop now, not even those who once stood beside him. Solara groaned under firelights, flashing across its living skin systems. Pushed to limits it had not reached in ages, Lyra stepped into the core, her hands glowing brighter than ever. Her mind opened to the ship, her voice whispering names long lost. Solara responded not with panic, but with rage, its form shifting its walls, expanding, its energy rising like a storm unchained. Battle turned fast. One moment, Solara was surrounded. The next it vanished, reappeared behind the enemy disabled engines. With sound alone, tore weapons apart with waves of memory. James and the rebels struck with speed, guided by Solara's vision, each move precise, each step predicted. In the end, the council ship fell broken, drifting into silence, but not without cost. One of the children had been taken during the chaos, pulled by shadow forces into a black pod, gone before alarms could rise. Lyra felt it like a hole in her chest, like a scream she could not voice. James promised they would find him, promised no one would be left behind. As Solara flew back into deep space, carrying new wounds and old hope, Lyra stood near the window, her eyes fixed on the stars. She said, "They wanted a war of silence, but we gave them a war of truth, and we are not done, not yet." Stars above felt heavy, as if they waited, holding their breath, watching the final moves of a game older than memory itself. Solara flew with purpose across the dark, its living hull glowing with the voices of those it carried, the freed, the found, the forgotten. James stood near the command panel, watching the maps twist and pulse, showing him paths and threats and something more, something new. Lyra sat in quiet near the core, her hands folded, her mind burning with the faces of every child, every voice, every life they had saved, and the one still missing, the one they had taken. The council had made its final move, not with fleets, not with armies, but with a trap that pulled at the heart and tested they. So they sent a message: no threats, no fire, just coordinates and a sentence. Come alone. Any lives. Lyra knew the risk, James knew the game, but they also knew the silence that came with doing nothing, and silence had never been their path. Solara offered a dozen ways to strike, to trick, to win, but Lyra said no. This time she would go as herself, not a symbol, not a weapon. Just as Lyra, James argued, his voice calm, but his heart screaming. He said there was no safety in their hands, no deal in their words. Lyra looked at him and said, "I am not going to trust them. I am going to end them." They flew toward the meeting point, a planet once golden, now cold, its skies cracked with storms, its air full of static. The council waited inside an ancient tower once used to crown kings, now a place of secrets and shadows. Lyra entered alone, her steps soft, her face still, her eyes filled with fire. The chamber was full of robes and masks, old voices that once controlled galaxies, now standing unsure in the presence of the girl they had tried to own. The high speaker stepped forward, his crystal skin dull, his voice sharp like broken glass. Said, "You have caused much damage, child. You have unbalanced the order, turned planets against peace, broken the silence we built." Lyra replied, "Your silence was never peace, it was fear, and now it ends." They offered her a seat beside them, not as a prisoner, not as a guest, but as one of them. They said, "Rule with us, keep the bloodline alive, guide the next era through power and unity." Lyra asked, "In the camps will stay?" They nodded. "And the chains will stay?" They nodded again. "And the lies will stay?" They said, "The galaxy needs order, not truth." She looked at the throne behind them, carved from stolen stones, marked with names of the first slaves forgotten by all. "But the stars," she said, "I am not your queen, and I am not your future." Then she turned to the child in the center, chained and silent, the one they had taken. She reached for him, and light burst from her palms. Not fire, not flame, but memory. The council screamed as the walls lit up, showing every secret, every crime, every moment they had buried. Outside, James and Solara received the signal. They moved fast, breaking through the storm, tearing down drones, melting towers with sound and speed. Inside, Lyra stood with the child behind her, her hands open, her voice calm. She said, "You built your world on control and fear, but I was not made to lead your order. I was made to break it. The high speaker tried to stop her, his hands glowing with old tech butt. The child beside her stepped forward, his own hands glowing brighter together. They touched the floor, and the tower began to change. Symbols on the walls rewrote themselves. The masks cracked. The thrones crumbled. James entered through the light and stood beside them, his weapon ready but unused. He looked at Lyra and said, "Are you ready?" She nodded and said, "Let them watch." Solara connected to the chamber, its energy reaching across the system, broadcast into every sector, every world, every device. Message was simple: the rule is over, the chains are broken. The truth belongs to everyone now, and so does freedom. The council fell not with a scream, but with silence as their power slipped through their fingers like sand and wind. The tower collapsed behind them as they walked away, not running, not hiding, just walking towards something new. Rebel ships landed around them. People stepped out not to fight, but to cheer, to cry, to believe. As Sarah met them near the ruins, her face tired, her eye wide. She said, "I did not think it would happen like this." James replied, "Neither did we, but it had to happen." Lyra stood with the rescued child, now smiling, now safe. She looked at the sky, now clear, and said, "I thought I would feel angry or lost or hollow." James asked what she felt now. She said, "I feel like I finally belong to myself." Later, aboard Solara, the stars looked different, brighter, louder, kinder. The freed children rested in quiet rooms lit by soft colors made by the ship itself. James sat near the observation deck watching the stars turn slow and wide. Lyra joined him without speaking, and they sat like that for a long while. He said, "You did it." She said, "No, we did." I've asked, "What now?" She said, "We keep going, not as heroes, not as rulers, just as people who remember what it means to be free." Solara hummed a quiet song, when it had not sung in thousands of years. Outside, the galaxy turned slowly, now awake, now watching, now changed. And in that turning sky, a girl who was once a gift now stood as a guide, not with chains, not with fear, but with choice, always choice.